Dear Lord, we ask you to bless us as we hear your message today through the preaching and reading of your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The reading today is taken from Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 to 28. God's covenant with Noah. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it, and for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each man too. I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For the image of God is God made man. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number. Multiply on the earth and increase upon it." Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on the earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth, and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked backward and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they would not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend the territory of Japheth. May Japheth live in tents of Shem. And may Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Altogether, Noah lived 950 years, and then he died. Amen.
2nd reading comes from Revelations 4, and it is found on page 295. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven, with someone sitting on it. And on it, the one who sat there, had an appearance of jasper and cannon. A rainbow resembled an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white, and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the thrones came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. Before the throne 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of behind the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and behind. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox, and the third was like the face of a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of them, 4 living creatures, had 6 wings, and they were covered with eyes all around. Even under these wings, day and night, they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come.
The final reading is Matthew chapter 24, from verse 36 to 44. No one knows about the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven or the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. When the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken, the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have left his house to be broken into. So you must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect. May God add his blessing to his word this morning. So this is the final in our 4-week series on the story of Noah. Chapter 9 concludes his story, and not in a very nice way, I guess. He plants a vineyard, drinks the wine, gets drunk, takes his clothes off. Interesting. Let's start at the beginning of chapter 9, a new beginning. God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. Fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea that you are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. It's a new beginning. The first verse, it sounds very familiar to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28, because it's a repeat of what God said to Adam and Eve. This is Eden really all over again. God commissions Noah and his family to spread out across the earth and to re-establish human civilization. Everything will flow from him and his 3 sons and their families. Now this new beginning for Noah and his family in the earth is encouraging, because it gives us hope when we have messed up royally. We may think that God is through with us because of our mistakes and our sin. We may be saying things like, I've sinned too much, I've made too many mistakes, God could never possibly give me another chance. In the Old Testament, in Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 7, there's a wonderful invitation to those who feel their sin is too great to be forgiven. It says, Let the wicked forsake his way, the evil man his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will freely pardon. In fact, the King James translates this beautifully. It says, He will abundantly pardon. That is what we need. When we stray, when we fall, when we make a mess of life, we need a God who will abundantly pardon us. Abundantly. With God, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. Secondly, there's a new command. The next few verses say, But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood in it. For your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal and from each man too. I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number. Multiply on the earth and increase upon it. So God is really giving I've said a new command, but new rules for this new life that is about to be established on earth. Basically, there's one rule. It's to respect life, God says to Noah. First of all, he says, don't eat any living animals. That's a whole sermon on its own, I suppose. Don't eat any living animals. And don't murder. Talks about shedding the blood of another, which we are not to do. And then God explains in those verses why murder is wrong. For in the image of God has God made them. To kill a person is to kill someone made in God's image. When we are interacting with other people, we are interacting with people made by God. And God wants us to recognize His image in everybody. It says in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 5, God says, I will demand an accounting from everyone. In other words, one day God will require each person to account for his or her actions. God says, from the very beginning of time, don't harm. Don't kill another human being. You'll be answerable to God. So He establishes these set of rules by which to live. And then God gives a new promise. He says to Noah, I will establish my covenant with you, Noah. What's a covenant? It's a promise made by God to us. And each covenant has a sign that goes with it. A sign or evidence that God has made this promise. It's an outward symbol to remind people that a covenant has been entered into with God. At our baptism, which is a sacrament, and Holy Communion are sacraments in the church. At our baptism, God made a covenant with us as little babies, or as adults. And in that moment, in that spiritual realm, and by faith, whether you came as an adult or whether your parents brought you in faith, God took you as His child. Holy Spirit, the sign and seal of the Holy Spirit was made on your life. The water in your baptism, during your baptism, was an outward sign of a deep, deep inward work that God was establishing with us in that moment. It was a covenant, a deep covenant. Hold that thought. The word rainbow is recorded here in Genesis chapter 9. If you look in the Hebrew, it is simply the word bow. Not the rain, just the word bow. And that word is used in Hebrew for a weapon, like a crossbow. It was a weapon that they used, which they could eliminate their enemies in those days. The Old Testament describes God as a warrior. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is His name. And Habakkuk says, you uncovered your bow. You called for many arrows. And Zechariah says, His arrows are like lightning. So in these verses in the Old Testament, God is depicted as a warrior with a bow. In the flood, during the flood, for all those days, God, the warrior, shot those lightning arrows, pierced the earth, the rain fell until the earth was flooded. There was destruction. In other words, he bent his bow as he shot in wrath. But from now on, when this rainbow is in the sky, what is going on here? It's telling us that God has hung up His bow. He's hung it up in the sky where everybody can see it. Next time you see a rainbow, maybe we'll be fortunate enough to see one today after the rain last night. That's God's bow. He's hung it up. Because He said it's not the time of judgment. This is a time of peace. He hung it up in the sky as a sign of his mercy towards a world of sinners. When we see that bow as sinners on this earth, we should see it as a sign of God's peace with us. He's hung it up. It's a token of His promise to us that never again, He said, will I destroy the world again by water. 2 Peter 3 records that the next time He comes, it will be destroyed by fire, not by water. So the rainbow is supposed to remind you that God has surrendered. God has hung up His bow. It's like He's saying, you've all sinned against me. You've made yourselves my enemies. I've flooded the earth, but I'm hanging up this bow. And now I'm going to bless you. I'm not at war with you today. I'm establishing a covenant with you. There's no more war. The symbol of war and enemies and anger and revenge and murder and hostility in that moment becomes a picture of love and mercy and grace and peace. It's also a picture of life. The text does not say to us, God does not say, I will never send a storm again. God never promised, we talked a little bit about this last week, that life would be free of storms and trials and trouble and difficulties, because we live in a fallen world, and there will be famine and war and terrorism and diseases and evil. As you know, most rainbows appear only after the storm. If there were no storms, there'd be no rainbows. There will be many storms along the way. There'll be lots of shedding of tears. There'll be lots of sadness. There'll be lots of disappointment in life. But when we look up, we will see God's rainbow. A sign, a token of His love there. Reminding us that the storms of life don't mean that things are out of control. In fact, the opposite. The rainbow teaches us that God is in control. After the storm for Noah and his family, there was hope again. There was new life. There was blessing promised to them. And it's still true for us today. Every time you see a rainbow after the storm, be reminded of God's promise that He will bring out the good of what seems difficult. That's His promise. I've set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it, He says God. I will see it, and I will remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind of the earth. We read from Revelation this morning. Because what is one of the first things John sees? He sees the throne of God. He sees God seated on His throne. And can you remember the reading? What did he see? A rainbow. Isn't that interesting? A rainbow. And it's interesting that when we read the book of Revelation, John makes no attempt to describe God in any human form. If you go back and read Revelation 4, he describes God in this flashing of colors of various gemstones. The Bible's way to see God in terms of light. John sees this vision of the throne and God seated on the throne in terms of light, with flashes from all these precious stones that forms this rainbow. We know from Scripture, as Billy read, that there was jasper and sardian and emerald, some of the most precious stones. They were blood red and green and like the color of diamonds, flashing. The picture that John saw was like the flashing of a diamond in the sun, with these dazzling rays of green and red, and you can only but begin to imagine it in your mind. And John, as you read that text in Revelation, he piles up these colors and images to convey the beauty of this rainbow around the throne of God. You know, I try to look for a picture, and obviously you actually can't find one. John is saying to us in Revelation, it's the best way I can describe what I saw in my vision. I'm just going to leave it there. It's a glimpse of heaven. And for a brief moment as we read Revelation, John takes us out of this world, out of this temple world, into the reality of heaven, just for a brief moment to show you. And in that moment, as we read it and try and understand it, and you saw in that song, He is Worthy, the lyric writer of that song, and they composed the DVD, you saw them trying to picture that together as well. In a brief moment, we have this privilege of seeing where we're going to live forever. We're going to look at God with the rainbow over Him. Jesus will come again. We don't know the day or the hour. And the events in the days of Noah, they're really the same as what's happening today. Same thing as before Christ will come again. In the days of Noah, people were busy doing their thing. They were totally unaware of God. They were only concerned about themselves. They didn't care about eternity. They were not ready. They'd been given warnings by Noah, but they didn't listen to those warnings that they'd been given. The Bible says to us that life will be going on as usual. And then Christ will return. There will be no warning. We'll be going about our everyday tasks. And we would be surprised that He'll return and He's come back, just as in the days of Noah and the flood. We don't know the time of Christ's return, but we know that He's coming. Scripture's clear. He's coming. He may come today, tomorrow. He may come centuries from now. But whenever He comes, we need to be ready. That's the warning. We need to be spiritually and morally ready. We need to live today as if Jesus is going to come at lunchtime. Matthew 24 that I read said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be. Listen to this. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating, drinking, marrying, giving marriage, up to the day they entered the ark. They knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus' purpose in telling about His return is not to stimulate predictions and make us calculate about the date and when He will come. It's to warn us to be prepared. Are you ready? Will you be ready? Knowing that Christ will return, and His return will be sudden, it will be unexpected. And just knowing that should motivate us to make sure we're ready and prepared. It's going to happen like that. We don't have to live unaware that Jesus will return again. We've been told very clearly He's coming back. We've got no excuses. And though we never know the day or the hour, we can choose to make every day count. We can make sure that we're ready. We can live every day with this eternal perspective that one day I'm going to live in that place called heaven that John just tries to describe to me. So you must be ready, said the words of Matthew, because the Son of Man will come when we least expect it. I'm going to conclude. There's always a reason to give thanks, always. First thing that Noah did when the door of the ark was opened, this is how chapter 8 ends. He built an altar and he gave thanks. His family had endured a year, a long time, on the ark with smelly animals. I'm sure they had many family feuds. But when he opened the door, the very first thing he did was build an altar, and he gave thanks to God. They could have grumbled. They could have complained about all they'd gone through. They could have. But instead they chose to give thanks. And God blessed them for it. Life will not always be easy. We may endure lengthy seasons of difficulty. Just like Noah and his family, we need to find a reason always to give thanks. When Noah built an altar to the Lord, took some of the animals, sacrificed them, the Lord smelt the pleasing aroma, and God blessed Noah. If you keep looking down, you'll never see the rainbow, ever. If you keep looking down, you will never see the rainbow. So keep looking up and give thanks. Your tithes and offerings will be received.